Started, there are a few thanks that I need to make. We're very grateful, as always, to the Friends of the Arkansas State Archives for sponsoring our Pen to Podium lecture series, which we started last January in 2017. We're very grateful for all that they do to support the state archives and providing the beverages for these lectures. Our Friends Group President, Susan Boyle, is here tonight. So they've got a table out in the foyer, and if you'd like more information about the Friends Group and how to join this very worthy organization, please pick up a flyer or talk to Susan or any one of the members. There are a number of them here tonight. If you're a member of the Friends Group, would you raise your hand? Quite a few Friends Group members, so any one of these people can tell you about the benefits of joining the organization, so I hope you'll talk to them. I'd also like to say how grateful we are for the support of the Arkansas Natural and Cultural Resources Council for funding tonight's organization. NCRC is administered through the Department of Arkansas Heritage, and we appreciate the continued support of that grant. We are, of course, grateful to the Department of Arkansas Heritage for providing this beautiful venue for our lecture series. I heard so many people say tonight it was the first time that they've been in this building, and I believe this might be one of the first evening events in this building. So I'm very grateful that they've opened the doors to us for tonight, and grateful to the Heritage staff who helped us in planning and executing the event. And we look forward to having the rest of our lecture series this year here. Grateful to Two Sisters Catering, who provided the lovely refreshments for tonight. And you can have your food and beverages in the room if you're wondering about it. And we have plenty more food left. It's not even all on the table. So if you get hungry, please refill your plate, because we don't want to have to take that food home with us. And finally, I am personally very grateful to the staff of the Arkansas State Archives, because an event like this doesn't happen without a lot of people pitching in and assisting with the planning. And we have a number of staff members who are here in the room tonight, and some who are still out there working, but I'd like to personally thank Tim Schultz, Tiana Anyaloe, who's been helping Janis with her book sale tonight, and Danielle McNeil and Bridget Wood. And I'm going to include you in that, Andrew, even though you work at Heritage. Andrew Vogler works with our public information. So I appreciate all that those folks do to keep us on track. It's a good team to work with. I'd like to quickly mention that we'll be continuing the lectures throughout this year. In April, Evan Demerel will present his book, African American Athletes in Arkansas, Black Razorbacks and Other Forgotten Stories. That book was funded in part through the Black History Commission of Arkansas's Curtis H. Sykes Memorial Grant Program. And I've heard marvelous things about the book. I'm looking forward to that lecture. In August, on the 21st, KUAR's Michael Hiblin will be speaking about his book, The Rock Island Railroad in Arkansas. And then our final 2018 Pen to Podium lecture on November the 13th will feature Ben Bolden, who will be speaking about his book, The Hidden History of Fort Smith. And all of those lectures will be here in the Heritage Diamond Room. And so now everybody knows where it is, and it'll be easier to find the next time. Janis is going to be autographing the books that she sold after her lecture, and she'll be taking questions after her talk tonight. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Janis Kearney, author, publisher, and presidential historian. We're very honored to have her tonight as the inaugural speaker for our 2018 Pen to Podium. She served under civil rights legend Daisy Bates as managing editor of the historic Arkansas State Press newspaper. In 1988, she became publisher and owner of the newspaper. In 1992, Janis worked on the Clinton-Gore Campaign and joined the Clinton administration in 1993, where she served as a media specialist in the White House Media Affairs Office, Director of Public Communications for the U.S. Small Business Administration, and for 5 years served as the country's first personal diarist to the president. In 2001, Janis and her husband Bob J. Nash, who's with her tonight, founded Writing Our World Publishing in Chicago. In 2015, she established the Read.Write.Share Writers Group, an umbrella company serving new and emerging writers. Please help me welcome Janis Kearney.
Thank you so much. Good evening.
Good evening.
It is a wonderful pleasure to be here tonight and to talk about a book that means a great deal to me, Sundays with TJ. And I want to echo Lisa and say thank you to everyone who made this possible tonight. And especially I need to thank Danielle, who was so wonderful during the last. She has been so very supportive of me and my work and my nonprofit, and I'm just very, very happy that they've worked with me and brought me here. I want to thank Lisa for having me and having these wonderful talks, and now that I know that there's going to be more, I will come back, and I'm more than happy to listen to all of the different authors. I'm going to spend about 30 minutes talking about my book, Sundays with TJ, and then I will take I will take questions. I think Lisa introduced my husband Bob, but Bob, will you stand and say hello? Bob Nash, who has been so supportive of me, has been so supportive over the years as I've kind of transferred from being a worker for government and for Daisy Bates and for other organizations and becoming a writer. It's a little bit different, so he's been supportive throughout that. Sundays with TJ. One of the things I knew very early in my life was that I was going to write this book, Sundays with TJ. I grew up down on Varner Road in Gould, Arkansas, and I was blessed to have someone in my life, my father, that there's only one person who would come in second to my father's storytelling, and that would be my old boss, Bill Clinton. But you have to promise not to tell him that he comes in second. I wrote Sundays with TJ for my father, for my family, and for myself. And while this is absolutely his story, I consider the book also a biographical memoir because it includes so much of my life and so much of the lives of my siblings. And for those of you who don't know, there were 19 of us. I'm going to put my glasses on if you don't mind. One of the things that I knew very early in my life was that I wanted to write my father's story, though I didn't know it would take me almost 50 years to do it. I did a few other things before I got around to it. The most wonderful part of writing this book was having my father still with me. As I worked through the final version, I was still asking him questions and listening to his stories up until the very end when he left us on December 29, 2014. And I was talking to someone earlier and said, the best decision I think I made was to come back to Arkansas so that I could spend the last years with my father. My only regret is that he passed away before the book was actually published. But he knew just about everything that was going to go in there. And that leads me to speak kind of on a soapbox to some of the people that are in this audience who are writers or historians or genealogists or biographers. Don't wait. If there are people in your life and they're in their senior years whose stories you think are worth documenting, do it. I was blessed that my father lived beyond any of our expectations, but even more importantly, that he was an avid storyteller who knew the importance of sharing his stories. I think this is especially important as the discussion and debates about whether American immigrants bring value to our country. I am completely not making a political statement when I say that probably more than ever before, we have to continue to tell our stories, to document our families' stories, as well as write the stories of the voiceless and disenfranchised. I am a staunch believer that the power of stories and that our communities and our nation are strengthened, not weakened, by the diversity within our communities, our culture, and our stories. And that's the end of the soapbox speech. My siblings and I were very blessed that TJ was such an excellent storyteller and had a memory that still puts us all to shame. I often tell the story of how after our day's work in the cotton field growing up, we would end our evenings settling down around my father's chair, listening to his amazing stories. He was blessed with the gift of storytelling unlike anyone I've ever met. I fell in love with stories and storytelling and writing and reading because of my father. And thanks to him, I've tried very hard to follow in his footsteps. So I came to this book project with a couple of objectives in mind. And the first was to paint a more comprehensive picture of how Thomas T.J. Kearney evolved from his childhood in Lake Village, Arkansas, to the man most people knew as a community servant, a leader in Gould, Arkansas. And I'm going to turn that Chico Candy. And secondly, I wanted to try as best I could to weave in as many as TJ's experiences and life interactions that helped shape the person he would become. What I call a miraculous transformation from a career wanderer to a family man, an amazing father, a community servant, and a church leader. I wish I could tell you how many times someone has stopped me and asked, what was the magical recipe for my father's longevity, his continued health, and his passion to live? What I know is that he was a man of deep faith. He lived his life to the fullest, which included, until the end, always finding a way to help others. And he woke up each day grateful for another day. And I personally believe there is something miraculous about living our lives in gratitude. Once I got serious about writing my father's book, I had to decide the best way to tell it. Gratefully, for the last 50 years, I had been interviewing him, researching, collecting his vignettes he'd shared with me. So to say I had plenty of material is an understatement. But what I had to decide was how to best glean what was most important of all the material I had. For you writers, you know that the hardest part of writing is the decision on what to keep and what to leave behind. You have to decide what contributes most to telling your story and what is unnecessary information that you just like. How could I best take readers on a journey with me as I retraced T.J. Kearney's life journey that began just 40 years after slavery ended in a very typical southern town of Lake Village, Arkansas? So I began collecting material for my book some 50 years ago, and I finally finished about 5 or 6 years ago. And what I ended up with was a book that included about half of what I collected over the years. And I just hope that I ended up with the best half. TJ's early childhood was not so unlike many children or grandchildren of slaves living in America's South. His parents suffered many of the same obstacles, discriminations that others did. His father was a small farmer who eventually lost his farm and became an itinerant farmer. He was a proud man who so often had to swallow that pride. TJ's life journey reminds me that it's not so much what we are confronted with in life, but how we respond to those confrontations. Yes, TJ's childhood and even his later years would have been shaped by some very harsh experiences. It was during the Jim Crow period. He would also be impacted by his early losses, especially that of his father at an early age. But there was most certainly something more than the tragedies and the harshness of life. There were intrinsic gifts that allowed T.J. Kearney to persevere and even to thrive in spite of his losses. From childhood, he was fascinated with life, and never in all the years did he lose that love for life. Even in his older age, there was still that gleam in his eye for the smallest of things, a deep affection for the very things that gave him joy as a child. He loved birds, and he could name every one. He loved trees, rivers, steamboats, passenger trains, and people. Oh, how he loved people. He loved to laugh, and he loved to tell jokes. He loved baseball, and he especially enjoyed playing baseball with his children. Sundays with TJ is about an adoring son and a wanderer, and what some called a roustabout. It's also about the life he settled into after meeting and marrying Ethel Virginia Curry in 1937. And I'm not keeping up with this very well, but that's Macon Lake where they lived. It is about the hardships they endured that made life for themselves a little harder. It is about his relationship with his family, his children, and his community. It is about a man who lived through pains, loss, impossible odds, yet left this earth at 107 years old with few regrets. His only regrets, and I laughingly tell this, were the people he didn't meet, the places he never visited. T.J. Kearney's early childhood was 5 miles outside Lake Village. His parents, Thomas Clayton and Cynthia Davis Kearney, resided there during the end of the 19th century and into the early 20th century. I never met my grandfather, Clayton, Thomas Clayton, but he is believed to have been born further south in Carroll Parish, Louisiana, and may have spent some years in Mississippi. I never learned what T.C. Kearney, my grandfather's age was when he navigated his way to Lake Village, or under what circumstances. His parents, I'm certain, were slaves. And like many slave families, there was a loosening of family ties as they migrated to different parts of the country to find permanence. In my research, I did learn that while slave owners kept excellent records of their slave population, post-slavery records were not kept as well. It is, however, believed that T.C. and his family was part of a large contingent of Kearneys who resided in Louisiana and Mississippi. My grandparents, T.C. and Cynthia, were both born in 1872, and they married on October 6, 1901. They had a family that consisted of 9 children. 6 of those children, including TJ, was from their marriage together, while Cynthia had 3 children when they married. TJ had little knowledge of his parents' history, although he maintained vivid memories of his childhood with them. His mother, he recalled, was doggedly attached to her husband and children, and at the same time distant with outsiders. She was, he said, different from other mothers in the community. She was what people called a handsome woman. Many mistook her for a full-blooded Indian. Her reddish-brown complexion and aquiline features likely gave them that impression. I'm going to try to find her. Okay, that's her in her older years with her younger son and grandchild. While many of her children mimicked her characteristics, excessively quiet and wary of outsiders, TJ had both his mother's quiet, observant personality, but also his father's extroversion, inquisitive, and a good conversationalist. The quality that TJ and Cynthia shared most, however, was their love of books and reading. His mother would often close herself off from the family while she read in her room for hours. He recalls that boxes of books would arrive at their home, addressed to his mother. TJ was maybe most fascinated by his mother's more otherworldly convictions, her mysticism, and her belief in spirits and root medicine. Though he wanted to grow up and be like his father, he held on to many of Cynthia's beliefs, including the ones about spirits. It is likely that Cynthia's belief represented a combination of the Louisiana Creole and Native American cultures she would have been familiar with. Both would have been considered taboo and unacceptable in Southeast Arkansas. She was also an herbalist and a root doctor, well before the terms were acceptable. She raised many strange plants and took her children to gather others from the swamps and wooded areas of Southeast Arkansas. Though the belief in the power of herbs was accepted by many in the Black community, there were those who looked down on the practice as backward, likening it to practice of Black magic or voodoo. In spite of, or possibly because, Cynthia Kearney had borne 9 children by the time she was 39, she had what was then called a frail constitution. In 1909, when her son Willie was born, the doctors kept her at the Lake Village Hospital for weeks. Her daughters, Virgie and Evivius, took over the care of her other children while she recuperated. By today's account, Cynthia would be considered probably an eccentric, a woman with uncommon beliefs and a peculiar personality. When he was young, TJ remembers his mother telling him about the spirits she was able to see, souls of the dead that continued to wander the earth. She once even took her children to one of her spiritual sightings. Yet, even with her mostly somber demeanor, TJ recalled the one thing that brought his mother joy, the water-bound circus called the River Palace. Anyone heard of River Palace? It was a circus on the river. He recalls his middle-aged mother taking him and his brothers to the riverboat circus, where the bustling crowd included both Black and white families. He recalled fondly how overcome Cynthia was with the majesty of the show and the large array of animals. The few hours they spent on the floating palace, he said, was one of the few times he witnessed his mother truly happy. Thomas Clayton, or TC, by all accounts, was a handsome man of slight build. When he wasn't at work in the fields, TJ recalls he dressed and went into town on business. He was well regarded in the community and was considered an apt businessman and well read. Unfortunately, we don't have a picture of him. As a small farmer, he also employed day laborers to help with his cotton crops. However, he was one of the many farmers, large and small, who lost their crops to the tragic boll weevil epidemic during the early 20th century. He was never able to recoup his losses and went from being a respected small farmer to an itinerant farmer. Around 1905, TC and Cynthia lived on Ganges Landing in Chico County, where TC worked for a rich landowner by the name of Epstein. Around 1907, TJ and his family moved to Beth River, a small community surrounded by beautiful body of water and endless cotton fields. TJ remembered the clear, pristine water that he and Harry often swam in and sometimes caught fish with their bare hands. The river, he says, was clear enough to see your reflection. As a child, TJ often shadowed his father throughout the workday. One of his fondest memories was that of his father playfully picking up both he and Harry and toting them on his shoulders. Growing up on the Mississippi River was maybe the most memorable part of TJ's childhood. As children, he and his brother Harry, who happened to also be his best friend, would often sneak off from their family to explore the levees of the Mississippi River and watch the big and small ships dock at the ports. They once sneaked into a showboat traveling the river and resting at port. He recalled the white men and women on board laughing and dancing to live music that he later decided was jazz. As they made their way home, TJ knew he would never forget the strange atmosphere of that steamboat filled with white men and women in their fine clothes, listening to music, dancing, and having such a good time, a way of life that was light years from his family's existence. During his childhood, TJ was called James by his parents, Buddy by his brothers, and Brother by his sisters. When any or all of them wanted to make fun of him, they called him Frizz, taunting him not only for the frizziness of his hair during rainy or humid days, but also because his father refused to cut his son's hair and allowed it to grow long enough to reach his waist. That lasted until he was about 9 years old, when his older sister got angry and cut off his long plait and buried it. As a child, TJ suffered bronchial problems and would have uncontrollable coughing seizures that his parents called the croup. His mother doctored on him with salves and strange teas, but nothing seemed to help. He once overheard his sister say to their father, "Brother isn't long for the world." Hearing this omen scared him and likely colored his outlook on life. But later, well into his 90s, he would laugh in gratitude that his sister's predictions were so off base. Like his father, the Chico County Census likely noted young TJ Kearney as mulatto. Though he was not especially fair in coloring, he bore the aquiline features and fine curly hair that denoted native Indian blood. Though his birthplace is documented as Macon Lake, just outside Lake Village, TJ vividly recalled a moment in his childhood when he traveled with his parents from Oklahoma when he was just a toddler. Early documents confirm that the Kearneys were, in fact, a part of the great migration called the Black Exodus to the West, during which many freed slaves migrated from the South to Oklahoma or Kansas in search of a better life. While some families stayed and made a life of themselves in the West, TJ's parents, like many blacks, returned to Arkansas. The promised land, many found, was little better than the place they'd left. In 1910, TC and Cynthia moved their family from Chico County to Lincoln County, about 50 miles north of Highway 65. Grady, Arkansas, became home to the Kearney family for the next 8 years, though they lived outside the town, out on the levee. TJ recalls that after arriving there, his father and brothers raised the land and built their home near Round Lake in Lincoln County. Migration would continue to play an important role in the Kearney family's trajectory. From my grandparents' participation in the Black Exodus to their family's continued moves between farms and small towns. My father often recalled his parents loading their children and their few belongings on the horse and wagon in the dark of night to move from one farm to find another place to work and live. Later, he learned it was about his father's pride. Ironically, while TC and Cynthia moved their family often, they never moved far from Chico County, the place of Cynthia's childhood. TJ's move from Macon Lake Road to Beth River, then Round River outside Grady, may have been the precipice that led to his life of wandering. From early childhood, he was drawn by the allure of the river and river life. His reverence for the Mississippi River was deep and grew deeper as he got older. Both Chico and Lincoln County held great enjoyment and awe for young TJ. In spite of his parents' poverty and their constant moves, and later the tragedies that would touch their lives, he was a child who never tired of seeing and learning and experiencing life. TJ and his siblings spent most of their time helping their father on their rented farmland. They were never able to attend school on a regular basis. Yet TJ loved school and could recall every detail of every school he ever attended, no matter how irregular his attendance was. He loved the teachers and loved getting to know other children in the one-room classrooms that he attended. Even after he began his wandering life, TJ would often find a schoolhouse after arriving in a new town, sit at the back of the room, and learn what he could, if only for a day. Without the opportunity to forge lasting friendships, his brothers played an especially important role in his life. Harry became his alter ego and his closest confidant. The two boys experienced most of life sitting or standing or walking side by side. TJ loved baseball and would tell us that he was a pretty good catcher and pitcher. It was a favorite pastime for the whole family. He loved playing marbles and said he most often won the cat-eye. Harry was 2 years older, extremely bright and serious to a fault. He was the perfect alter ego for young TJ, who soaked up the world around him and shared all he saw, felt, and thought with his closest friend, Harry. In 1918, America experienced one of the worst health tragedies in history, the Black flu epidemic. Unfortunately, the epidemic touched the Kearney family. His father's death was the greatest tragedy of the young TJ's life, the hardest thing for him to ever move past. He lost both his father and his most beloved sister to the Black flu epidemic just 3 days apart. TJ was just 11 years old. He described the loss of his father as somehow being the last straw for the Kearney family. His mother developed into a state of depression and moved in with an older sibling. TJ recalls a family suddenly rudderless. This is what precipitated the life that he embraced for the next 15 years, leaving home almost immediately after his father's death. Not yet a teenager, traveling Arkansas and later the country by foot and by trains. While the reason he embarked on this new life was tragic, in time it became an adventure. Never afraid of hard work and always having the look and demeanor of an older young man, TJ put his age up to work. He worked in labor camps, as a chauffeur, as a cowboy on a ranch, as a cook in a Greek restaurant, as a mercenary on ships that sailed as far as Liverpool and Cuba, in steel mills, even laying train tracks. This was all during a very dangerous era for blacks of all ages, the Jim Crow era, but most surely dangerous for a young black man in the world alone. Much later, a wiser TJ realized that the sights he saw, the people he met, the experiences, all helped shape the TJ Kearney who would eventually return home. In 1936, he finally listened to that voice that had been telling him to return home. That voice, he finally admitted, was God. He accepted that it was time to settle down and make something of his life. I've often shared the story that my father shared with us. all of his children, for as far back as I can remember. We eventually renamed it The Christmas Story. In a nutshell, the story is of TJ's returning home after all his years of travel and falling ill on Christmas Eve. During a fever-induced dream, he meets this beautiful girl that he'd never seen before, and this girl tells him she's his wife. When he wakes up, he chuckles and shakes his head. Fast forward 7 days later, on New Year's Eve, 1936, his friend Knapp comes to visit and invites him to a hog killing. Some of you might know what a hog killing is, where lots of people would be visiting and preparing for New Year's Day, including his wife's pretty cousin. To make a long story short, at the hog killing, a still puny TJ meets the girl he'd met in his dreams, wearing the same hat, the same green coat, and the same green shoes. Her name, he learns, is Ethel Virginia Curry, and 3 months later, they are married. TJ had finally traded in his traveling shoes. It wouldn't take long for TJ Kearney to be relegated to leadership in the communities he lived in. And while he had never belonged to church, he eventually joined and became a church leader as well. TJ and Ethel would bring 17 children into the world, in addition to the 2 they brought with them from previous marriages and relationships. The 2 took parenting seriously and made it their mission to ensure their children would understand their responsibilities, but also their possibilities. Unconditional love, living their faith by example, and the permission to dream. TJ instituted early education in his home, teaching his children to read and write before they went to 1st grade. TJ did not attend school on a regular basis, even during his earliest years, but he told us that he gained his education from living, traveling, meeting men and women from all backgrounds and cultures. He even learned to speak Spanish. Yet he knew the importance of education because God blessed him with a thirst for learning, and that is what he passed on to his children. Like his own father, he took the responsibility of parenting very seriously. He put all the lessons he'd learned throughout his years to good use. In spite of the many obstacles that life threw his way, the poverty, the discrimination, the injustices, TJ would continue to work toward becoming the person he knew God wanted him to be. After moving several times in their marriage, TJ and Ethel Kearney settled on Varner Road, 5 miles off Highway 65 between Grady and Gould. Their first child was born in 1937, the year they were married, and the last one was born in 1963. When you add the fact that my mother's first child was born in 1935, you realize that my mother was pregnant most of the 30 years between the ages of 17 and 46. All of the Kearney children were born at home, except for 2. There was a midwife, Mrs. Brown, but Dad helped too. And to repay him, my mother allowed him to name every one of us. That's why all of our names begin with J. All of us were born in either Jefferson County or Lincoln County. Some of us were born in Plum Bayou, Hooker, Pastoria, or Sherrill, on places called Free Farm, Wilkins Farm, and finally Varner Road, where I grew up. While TJ and Ethel were undereducated cotton sharecroppers, they had high expectations for their children, a strong faith, and a deep, deep reverence for education. This was the foundation they built for their children. In spite of our dire poverty, the social and racial obstacles, we were taught to always expect life to be better and to always work to make it better. Education was second only to church in the Kearney household. They expected the best out of their children, and most of the time they received it. 16 of their 17 children were college graduates. I might even describe T.J. Kearney as a complex man, in many ways a man before his time. He cooked and cleaned, he sewed, he took care of his children, even combing the girls' hair, well before division of responsibility between the sexes was a thing. While we were considered poorer than church mice, my father was never one to accept others' expectations of him. In his own way, he made something out of what so many believed was nothing. And before he left here, he touched many people's lives in big ways and small ways, his immediate family and so many others in his community. He dared his children to dream, to believe, and to change expectations. So if you'd ask what TJ's legacy was, I'd say the legacy left by TJ and Ethel is their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and those yet to come. They poured everything they had into making us better human beings. Their legacy is that for most of us, it worked most of the time. I subscribe to the village philosophy that we are our brother's keeper. My parents were blessed to live and raise their children inside a village. Though they never lived a comfortable life, TJ and Ethel were beloved by their neighbors, and they all shared whatever they had with those in need. While their lives were filled with great sacrifices, they demonstrated each and every day the Christianity that was so important in their lives. We, their children, were so blessed that God appointed these two amazing people as caretakers of our lives. Our responsibility is to keep the legacy alive and keep moving the blessings forward. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for listening to me tonight. And with that, I will take a few questions.
That's a beautiful picture. I love it.
That is my father's hands, and that is was the last grandchild when he died in 2014. That was the very last grandchild that he's holding. I had a question over here.
I was going to ask the same.
Oh, yeah, actually my niece, who is a professional photographer, took that, and we share that picture with a lot of people, yes.
You mentioned the possibility of Native American.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any way to trace that?
We did a little bit. I did some research. The only thing that I found was that they did go to Oklahoma and they stayed there for a while. But I don't have any real documents that show that, but there's no question. My grandmother and my father both definitely has Native American. There just weren't a lot of records kept by my families, you know, my grandparents, so we weren't able to find anything specific on that, but we certainly believe that there's something there.
Have you done any DNA testing?
No, I hadn't done that yet. I will, though. I will. Yes.
Do you have a favorite piece of advice that your father left with you?
Oh, he was full of advice. Let me see. He was very biblical. He was a Bible scholar. I mean, he taught himself to know every verse and chapter and character in the Bible. So a lot of the things that he taught us or told us came from the Bible. And he would just always tell us that we needed to treat everyone as we would have ourselves be treated. He believed that everyone was worthy, so he would always make us know that not only are you worthy, but the person that you look at or might want to look down at is just as worthy. So we always believe that, we were not any better than anybody else, but there was no reason for us to think that we weren't as good as anyone else as well. Yes?
You spoke of the Epstein family
Uh-huh.
farm, so you have direct connections with them?
My grandfather worked for the Epsteins when he was younger, before they moved away from Lake Village to Grady. And I do know that the family is still there, I think. Mm-hmm, yeah. So my father used to talk about that family quite a bit, yes.
With your grandmother having the root in Irving,
Mm-hmm.
did you find any traces of her back to Haiti?
I didn't, no.
The voodoo is
Mm-hmm.
so heavily
Mm-hmm.
in South Louisiana.
Right, it is very, and Lake Village is very close to Louisiana, so I'm sure that that kind of was a part of her knowing about that, the roots and the herbs and all of that, yeah. Yes?
Ms. Kearney, what would be the first step you would encourage a writer to take if they know of a story that has to be told? Like, you spoke of, we have older people in our circle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess, did you have to convince your dad that his story was worthy, or did he already know?
He already knew it. No, my father just loved sharing and, sharing his life. I think he kind of knew that it could help us if we knew his story. So he would just, from the time we came here, he would share his story with us. But I have interviewed older people, and I enjoy it because they have so much wisdom that they can share with us. I find it really easy. Usually the first time I go to interview an older person is to go without a tape recorder, although I use tape recorders, just to get to know them before I actually start interviewing, just having a conversation with them. The main thing is getting people to feel comfortable with you, because they don't really feel comfortable telling their life story, but if you can make them feel comfortable enough and make it seem as if you're just having a conversation, it comes out a lot better. I think I just love older people because of my father, because I grew up listening to him, and I have a comfort level with them. I think that's what you have to develop, a comfort level with them before you can actually interview them well, and they'll feel comfortable enough to share with you.
Janis, you're just amazing. I didn't know exactly what to expect tonight, and just listening to you tell this story, and you mentioned your dad being a storyteller, and you have so much in common with him. My question is, he was a dreamer also. Are you a dreamer?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. From way back. I mean, I grew up dreaming. I was very shy when I was young, so daydreaming was something that I did all the time. And I was talking to someone about, she asked me if I had Cotton Field of Dreams, that's right. You'll find dreams all through my books, really. I do. I think that's, I tell young people that you have to dream before you really decide what you're going to do in life. Dream about what the possibilities are. So dreaming was a huge part of my journey. Definitely. Anyone else? Yes, Mary.
Where did he learn Spanish?
Traveling. Just, he went to, he was in the West. He did a lot of work in the West, Mexico. He said he would sleep out on the range. A lot of the people that he met were Hispanics or Mexicans. So he just learned it. He picked things up really fast, and he could speak it. For years, he spoke Spanish, and we couldn't speak it, but he would speak it to us. Yeah. Other questions? One more question, then my husband. Go on.
Was music a real important part of your family, and was it church music or other type?
Yeah, church was huge in our family. We all went to church. I write in the book that I don't remember missing a Sunday going to church. It was not allowed in my home, but music was. And my dad, though we didn't listen to music, secular music or anything in the house, but as he got older, he would talk about the types of music that he really loved and the fact that he played harmonica when he was younger. So music was a part of his makeup, and I didn't realize that until we were much older. But I do have siblings that can really sing very well. Not me. Bob, would you like to say something?
Yeah, let me.
Wait, one more.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because when Bob starts, I'm gonna have to sit him down, so.
Are you planning to continue another book, a story of the family after this one?
I'm not sure. I have a book that I'm working on, I will be working on in a few months that will probably take another year or so. I've always wanted to write about my mother, but I'm not sure I will. I may do some work with one of my sisters to do a book on my mother. Bob?
Okay, thank you. All right, let me just say, this will take 5 minutes. Janis is modest about her family. Out of these, they each brought one child to the marriage, so a total of 19. But what she didn't say is out of the 19 total, 18 of them are college graduates, and 9 of the college graduates are lawyers from Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Vanderbilt, and the University of Arkansas law schools. Phenomenal family. That's the first point I want to make. The second point is that he was a Sunday school superintendent in his church for 60 years. Could quote scripture better than the preacher, without no Bible quoted. And here's the last thing I'm going to say. This is my best story. I don't think it made it in the book, but he was 102 years old when he was living down this road. Varner Road. His closest neighbor was over a mile away, and they said, "You got to move into town, move into Gould." You know, Gould was like what, 900, 1,200. He didn't want to do it, but he finally did. And they said, "We're going to rent your house." He said, "No, I don't want to rent a house. I want to buy a house." And so they said, "Okay." So he go down to the bank, and they found a house, and the bankers, he's 102 at the time, I guess, and they said, "Mr. Kearney, we can't give you no 30-year loan." He said, "I don't want a 30-year loan. I just want a 15-year loan." And he got it, bought a house. Anyway.
Go.
Anyway, we have books.
We have
books. You can buy books out there either we have a credit card thing, checks, cash, and the best one, the one I love, is Cotton Field of Dreams, which is a bestseller. She sold over 20,000 of those books over the years. And then if you buy a book, you'll get Conversations from Hope to Harlem, which is about, she interviewed people all over the country about what they thought about Bill Clinton. And she interviewed Bill Clinton to say what he thought about his presidency and life, and you get that free. And then the one about, what's the other one, is Something to Write Home About, was working in the White House with Bill Clinton. 3 doors down from him. And then, what else is it? Anyway. That's enough. That's enough. All right. We'll be out.
Thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Janis. That was so enjoyable, and those are wonderful stories. Thank you for sharing your wonderful memories of your family and your father with us, and thank you for saying that the best thing you ever did was to move home to spend your father's last years with him. That hits home for me, and I appreciate you sharing that. And thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next Pen to Podium in April. I almost said March. We did March last year, but it's April this year. So thanks for coming, and safe travels on your way home tonight.